Items to declare members not declared at their first meeting that are relevant to today's discussions. No. Okay. Any apologies that we need to record? I'm not aware of any at the moment. Okay. Agenda item 2 is chairperson's business. Members, I would advise you that I have received correspondence at page 5 to 6 in the pack from the Advertising Standards Authority regarding guidance published on the 7th of November 24 on advertising regenerative farming initiatives. This guidance is in regard to the interest and discussion around regenerative farming. While not yet a common feature in the mainstream of advertising, this concept is gaining traction as a solution to environmental issues, particularly within the agricultural sector. However, regenerative farming currently lacks a legal or universally accepted definition, so could be used variably, potentially leading to misrepresentation from advertisers and misunderstanding amongst consumers. The guidance presents an effort to promote truthfulness and clarity in advertising as the agricultural sector navigates these emerging practices. So members, are you content to note and keep in mind this guidance in our work as we consider emerging farming practices? Yep. Thank you, members. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting on the 14th of November 24. I refer to pages 8 to 21 of the pack for the draft minutes dated the 14th of November of 24. There is one amendment. The time the meeting opened was not recorded. This has now been added. Are there any other items that you would like to note on agenda item 3? No? Get that? Thank you, members. Agenda item 4, matters arising, and refer to correspondence from the department dated the 14th of November in the packet pages 23 to 25 regarding the Assembly debate on the draft Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment number 2 order. 24. Minister Muir has agreed to lead the debate on the 26th of November, subject to the approval of the Assembly Business Committee. The ERA Committee were provided with advice notice of the laying of the above mentioned order, together with a summary of the proposed amendments made in a letter dated the 19th of September. Members, the committee noted this correspondence at their meeting on the 26th of September and received an oral briefing on the 7th of November, which was recorded by Hansard. The Minister is grateful for the committee's consideration of the order, and in moving the order, he will highlight the following amendments. The alignment of the UK ETS cap with the net zero trajectory. Then GB only amendments made during the recent period when the Assembly was not sitting, now being extended to Northern Ireland with respect to aviation, free allocation, carbon capture activities, amendments to free allocation entitlement for electricity generators, and the inclusion of flights from Northern Ireland to Switzerland in the scope of the scheme. Then we're looking at inclusion of process emissions from CO2 venting from 2025, and finally incorporation of a deficit notice and associated penalty in the scheme. I'll be speaking at the debate on behalf of the committee, so if you're content to note at this point, or any points you want to make? Content to note? Thank you. Yep. Okay. Agenda item 5. Oral briefing consultation on amendment to Annex A of the UK wider joint fisheries statement. So members, I refer you to papers in your packet, pages 26 to 29, regarding the letter from the department dated the 10th of October regarding the consultation on amendments to Annex A of the UK wide joint fisheries statements, otherwise known as the JFS, on which we requested an oral briefing. The UK Fisheries Policy Authorities, of which there is one, published the Joint Fisheries Statement, JFS, in 2022 in accordance with the Fisheries Act 2020. The JFS includes how these authorities propose to make use of fisheries management plans, Annex A to the JFS, to achieve or contribute to the achievement of fisheries objectives. The Fisheries Policy Authorities have agreed to amend Annex A of the JFS, including extensions for the publication dates of FMPs and the changes to the scope and coverage of some of those FMPs. So regarding the FMPs, for which DAERA is the lead authority, the proposed amendments are as follows. The REC Pelagic FMP 22 to 26, which was previously 22 to 23, REC Demersal FMP 22 to 26, previously 22 to 24, and the Northern Ireland Inshore FMP 22 to 26, previously 22 to 24. So in that regard, the Department would be grateful for any response recommendations from the committee to be provided by the 29th of November, and hence we requested this briefing today. So I welcome from the Department Mr Patrick Smith, the Sea Fisheries Policy Branch, and Mr Owen Little, the Director of Marine and Fisheries Division. So thank you for coming in on a Tuesday for this unusual meeting that we have today. I'm just going to ask you to brief the committee. Thank you. Okay,
let's start, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair, for the invitation today to brief the committee on the consultation draft of amendments to Annex A of the Joint Fisheries Statement. I'll keep these opening remarks brief because I think you've covered some of them in your opening remarks, but just by way of short background, the Joint Fisheries Statement was a statutory requirement of the Fisheries Act 2020. It was first published by the UK Fisheries Policy Authorities in November 2022. Annex A to the Joint Fisheries Statement listed 43 fisheries management plans that the UK Fisheries Policy Authorities are committed to publishing. By definition, a fisheries management plan is a document prepared and published under the Fisheries Act 2020 that sets out policies designed to restore one or more stocks of sea fish to or maintain them at sustainable levels. Department notified the ERA Committee by written correspondence of the current consultation draft on the proposed amendments to Annex A of the JFS. This coincided with the statutory requirement for the Department to lay the consultation draft in the Assembly, and indeed for the other UK fisheries policy authorities to do so simultaneously in their respective legislatures. The consultation draft was laid in the Assembly on the 10th of October. In accordance with paragraph 3.1a of Schedule 1 of the Fisheries Act 2020, the Fisheries Policy Authority specified a statutory scrutiny period for scrutiny of the consultation draft by the appropriate legislature. This scrutiny period was specified in the Department's correspondence to the committee which you referred to earlier, giving notification of the consultation. The specified scrutiny period agreed by the Fishery Policy Authorities is until the 29th of November 2024. Just in terms of the proposed amendments, they don't impact on any of the fisheries policy in the original Joint Fisheries Statement. Indeed, as you say, they include extensions for the publication dates for many of the fisheries management plans and changes to the scope and coverage of some of the FMPs. These amendments, in terms of the extensions to publication dates, they're required to enable the UK Fisheries Policy Authorities to produce high-quality, comprehensive and robust FMPs that will take account of stakeholder needs and achieve the long-term aim of sustainably managed fisheries in line with the fishery objectives in the Fisheries Act. Regarding FMPs, for which DERA is the lead authority, the proposed amendments extend the publication date to 2026 for the following: the RIC Pelagic FMP, the RIC Demersal FMP, and the Northern Ireland Inshore FMP. And just for clarification, the Northern Ireland Inshore FMP is being renamed the Northern Ireland Non-Quota Shellfish FMP. The species within the scope of that FMP remain the same. The change simply reflects that the coverage of this FMP will now include all Northern Ireland's waters, not just the 0 to 12 nautical miles as originally stated in the JFS. In addition, a new entry was included in the consultation draft to include an FMP for periwinkles in Northern Ireland zone. This reflects the position taken by the Department in its response to the earlier consultation on the hand gathering of shellfish in the intertidal zone published in June 2024. I'll just come to close now, Chair. The FMPs have an initial lifespan of 6 years, after which they must be reviewed. So it's important, therefore, that we get these FMPs right. The proposals made in the consultation draft to extend the publication deadlines provide the right course of action that will enable the Department and indeed the other UK fisheries policy authorities to best deliver the FMPs, allowing us to listen to stakeholders and take their thoughts on board. The Department will continue to progress the co-design work in drafting the FMPs with the aim to finalise the drafts ahead of statutory consultations on each FMP and to enable the final FMPs to be published in advance of the revised end dates proposed in the consultation. When the final FMPs are published, these will place a duty on the fisheries authorities to exercise their functions in accordance with the policies set out in the FMPs. Chair, we're happy to pause there and take any questions that the committee members might have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. I've just maybe a couple of questions. So there was the change that you've alluded to, which I read into the minutes a minute or two ago about the change in terms of the taking over all of the waterways, I take it. And so not just the 0 to 12 miles of inland, but all of the waterways in Northern Ireland. What was the rationale for that?
There was just a gap. Whenever this joint fisheries statement was first published, we had obviously 3 FMPs that DERA was leading on, which was the RIC Pelagic and the Demersal one. Then we had the Northern Ireland Inshore. But in the annex to the JFS as originally published, it had Northern Ireland's 0 to 12, or Northern Ireland's Inshore zone, which by definition is only out to 12 miles. But there is a piece of Northern Ireland's waters which are out with the 12 miles, which is over south, sort of west, sort of over towards the Isle of Man. So it was really just to close off that gap and to make sure that all of our FMPs that we're producing are covering all of our waters.
And it's the marine waters, cover all marine waters.
Okay, no problem. And is there any rub at all with recreational or anglers at all regarding this? Is it just commercial fisheries?
Well, FMPs will look at recreational activity as well. Certainly for the inshore FMP or this non-quota shellfish one, it's something that we're keen to see, is to take account of what impact recreational potters have on our stocks of crab and lobster.
Right, okay. And in that regard, so it's out for consultation. The changes, or
Yes, the changes to the original JFS, which are set out in Annex, the only changes that are out to consultation are in effect the Annex A, which lists all of the FMPs, which by definition they have, what species are covered in your FMP, what geographical area, and the timescale for publication of those. So it's that Annex A where they're changing dates, and a few of them the geographical scope, one for us in Deira and a few others in Scotland.
my final one then, in terms of identifying potential new stakeholders to this, given the changes, is there a list? Have they been identified, or is it just done through a standard public consultation and an invite to respond?
This consultation has, it's a standard consultation, it's a 6 weeks one, but given that the changes are quite technical or minor, rather than opening up the whole policy thing, we've shared it with all our key stakeholders in terms of the key representative bodies across industry and our ENGOs, and crucially as well, we've sent it to all our fishers individually. So I think we've got 14 responses. It's actually DEFRA who's coordinating all of this consultation. I think to date we've got 14 responses, and none of them objecting to any changes. So,
okay, thank you. Declan, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You made reference to all of the NI waters. See, in relation, obviously you'll be aware there's long-standing transboundary issues relating to our waters. No more so than up in Lough Foyle, which is disputed territory. So, what level of engagement would you have on with, say, your southern counterparts in terms of these issues, and what impact it might have it on this joint fisheries statement?
The two distinct areas talking about Lough Foyle and Carnfoot Lough. Carnfoot Lough, there is good mutual working, because the navigation channel is effectively in the middle of the waterway. We're already close working on the aquaculture sector down there to make sure that we've got sustainable aquaculture businesses in that area. Lough Foyle, as you rightly point out, is a more difficult area, and there are conversations happening about how we can look to resolve this issue and work towards an MOU, so that actually we can, in the longer term, look for regulation of aquaculture, particularly in that area, because that would be the key issue in Lough Foyle. And as we see on the Republic of Ireland side, there is quite an intense aquaculture business which wouldn't be authorised at the minute. But on the Northern Ireland side, there wouldn't be anything at the minute, and we've done a lot of regulation to make sure that it remains that way. So there is at the UK Republic of Ireland level negotiation, or not negotiations, but engagement to look about how we can actually take this forward. And this has been sort of on the table for a number of years, and I think we're positive that there may be some movement to get some sort of MOU to at least allow regulation of aquaculture in that area. So that doesn't really answer about the fisheries management plan, because it's more about aquaculture in that area.
And just very brief, you mentioned that. So what you're saying then is that there would be, do we not have the legal powers or the VARs to regulate aquaculture? Because that's a disputed territory.
The problem is that is the issue is because it's hasn't been agreed. It would be hard for that regulation or Lochs Agency or whoever becomes a regulating authority. So by the intent would be, if an MOU come in agreed, then it allows who's going to be the regulation authority to that area to actually then bring it into normal regulation.
And there's you don't have any update on where that MOU's at? I know we're talking.
I mean, what I can say is
100-year-old issue, right?
Maybe the generation, but there are negotiations. Well, not negotiations. Sorry, there are discussions between the officials to try and put proposals forward to get movement in this here, because everybody recognises that we need to have a regularised industry on both shores, because there's a big economic activity that can be realised, or economic opportunity can be realised, but also by regularising it means we mitigate the risk of any fish disease or aquatic diseases. So it's in everybody's interest to get this right. And the other issue is if it's unregulated, then there's no sort of boundaries, and then it could affect navigation channels. So everybody has got positive intent to get to a solution that we can actually regulise the activity in Lough Foyle.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. And obviously we've had conversations before, Owen, just in relation to the state of the fishing industry in Northern Ireland. And I suppose whenever we look at consultations coming forward, there's always that dread that it will have an unintended consequence on our industry. So it's really about how do we make sure that the FMPs don't have too much of a negative impact, rather, I suppose, really looking at it in a more positive way, that they actually gain from this.
So I think the assurance I can give yourself and the committee is that this is about making sure fish stocks are sustainable, particularly the key stocks that have an economic activity and that we fish. So this is not about stopping fishing, it's not about restricting, it's about getting a plan that's put in place that we have the stakeholders bought into, that actually makes sure that those fish stocks are sustainable for the future. And the intent has been from the start to have a co-design where we have, you know, the key people around the table, and that includes the industry, ENGOs, etc., to make sure that all views are heard and everybody's issues, challenges, and look at opportunities come forward. You know, I agree with you. The fishing industry has a lot of pressures at the minute. You know, we've got the overarching, you know, climate change, or what's happening in the environment due to climate change. We've got spatial squeeze from other activities. We've got potential closures. We've got the post-EU exit sort of restrictions in the Republic of Ireland zone. So I think that to assure you that the department is sensitive, and particularly the minister, about actually making sure these plans provide sustainable stocks for the future, so we have a profitable industry and sustainable stocks.
I appreciate I suppose, how you verbalise that and the recognition that there is, and I suppose the proof will always be in the pudding, but I think we just need to be mindful of all of the potential consequences that these things will have. Moving into and looking at the inland waters and around the issues around periwinkle, which fall within the Strangford Lough area, which is in my constituency. The regulation around that is very lax, and that the only legislation there is around environmental health standards. So I suppose I'm conscious of at what point will the department look to bring forward any type of regulation or legislation in order to look at the likes of a closed season and issues around sort of collecting data and so on of the stock.
So, and that's what the Fisheries Management Plan will hopefully produce, you know, what the measures are required for us to actually, again, bring this into proper regulation, because the truth would be that we're sort of unknown to what actually is happening with periwinkle gathering. You know, the economic value ranges from conservatively at least £1 million. I heard that, you know, for a kilogram of periwinkles in a local market, it's £8 a kilogram, and there could be up to 500 tonnes actually harvested, which would be a substantial amount. And obviously that has an impact on the local environment, so it's about getting that right. But also the people who are actually involved in the gathering, making sure that they're not, you know, none of their rights are being abused as well, because, you know, there's been a history and sometimes in shellfish gathering across the UK and Europe of this happening. So we've got a broad range of stakeholders coming together for the periwinkle fisheries management plan, and we'll be looking to see what then measures come out of that to give options for the minister, and then obviously the committee will see those in due course.
Do we have timescales for that?
Well, this fisheries management plan has to be in by 2026, and Patrick will keep me right. And this is the new one, so we've already done some preliminary work with previous consultations and engaged in this area, not least from yourself, from raising the issue and other of your colleagues. So we're quite well developed on the other fisheries management plans, So even though we've got a bit of extra time, that's not slowing us up. It just gives us a better pace to make sure that we get all the stakeholders' views, and then our efforts will very much ramp up for Periwinkle Fisheries Management Plan. But that's not to say we have to wait until the end of 2026 to bring in measures. We still have various bits of legislation that if we need to actually act on any bit of the fisheries sector, we can actually bring forward measures, as we've shown in the last few years, where we brought in, due to the industry actually asking for it, restrictions on crab sizes, etc. So I think the key thing is we'll not sit here and wait till the end of 2026. If there's something arises that needs to be done a bit more expediently, we'll push that forward. But we'll keep the committee briefed on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Are there any other questions from the members? We're good? Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. We'll maybe see you again at some stage.
Chair, could you just ask committee, is there any particular response they want to make on this, or are they content that they're fair enough today?
Okay, in regard to that then, members, has anybody got any issues with anything that they heard today, anything that they're unsure about, or are we content that we've received enough of a briefing on this matter? Yeah. And obviously we'll pick up just in terms of we've got the minute in terms of the questions and the answers and stuff that we have there, so content to move on? Yep. Okay. Thank you, members. Okay. Then we're going to go on to agenda item 6, which is the SL1, the Bovine Farrelled Area Control Order 2024. As discussed last week, DAERA intends to make 2 statutory rules which will contribute to the eradication of BVD in Northern Ireland. BVD is a highly contagious feral disease of cattle which affects their productivity and compromises their welfare. Calves infected at a certain point in gestation do not develop immunity, most die before the age of 2 and shed the virus at high levels. The prevalence of BVD has reduced significantly in recent years following the introduction of the BVD Eradication Scheme Order 2016. However, the department states that a minority of herd keepers continue to retain positive animals or fail to test their animals, thus hindering full eradication of BVD. The committee raised some issues at last week's meeting, questioning the cost of the SR to the farming industry and communication with the industry, so an oral briefing was actually requested. The BVD Control Order 2024 information is on your pack, guys, at pages 31 to 49. This SR makes provision for the introduction of herd restrictions in Northern Ireland as a disease control measure against BVD, and a summary of how herd restrictions will be provided is detailed at pages 48 to 49 of the pack. The SR will be led before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure and subject to executive approval. It is anticipated that it will come into operation in early January 2025. So if we do have a Darren Fullerton present to the committee, but I'm seeing 3 names up here. So yeah. Christopher Andrews and Mervyn Dunlop as well. Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, good morning. How are you? Okay, I've actually introduced you before you get in. I was so excited that you were coming. So I'm just going to invite you then. We have Darren Fulton, Christopher Andrews and Mervyn Dunlop. Is that correct? Yeah?
Yes,
okay,
it is,
thank you very much. So if you would like to just brief the committee. We're all yours. Thank you.
No problems, Chair. I've just to probably reprise a few introductions. I'm Christopher Andrews, Acting Deputy Director, Animal Health and Welfare Policy Division in the department. We're obviously here to talk about the eradication of bovine viral diarrhoea and the 2 pieces of legislation that we wish to bring forward. I'm joined today with Darren Fullerton, who's the policy lead on BVD, and Mervyn Dunlop, who is the veterinary lead on BVD. You've already received some written briefing, but we're obviously ready to provide you with a full presentation. So I'm just going to hand over to Mervyn, who will lead off, and then Darren will provide some details on the legislation itself.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to attend committee today. As you'll be aware, the BVD Eradication Scheme is an industry-led scheme managed by Animal Health and Welfare Northern Ireland. The department provides critical support to Albany's work through the provision of BVD data from NIFAS, and we meet regularly to discuss policy development. The BVD scheme should be considered a success story in that BVD incidence at both herd and animal level has fallen more than 70% since compulsory testing started in 2016. This is having a noticeable positive impact on cattle farms in terms of animal welfare, farm profitability, reduced antibiotic usage and reduced greenhouse gases. However, progress has plateaued over the past 2 years, and it's clear that more needs to be done to eradicate this disease. The three main issues that are delaying progress are, firstly, the retention of positive animals by a minority of farmers. Secondly, the silent spread of infection from infected farms through transiently infected animals and pregnant animals which are carrying an infected calf. And thirdly, the failure by some farmers to BVD test all their animals. Currently, we have over 16,000 animals over 30 days old which should have been tested under the 2016 legislation. Now, this ranges from over 1,000 herds which are largely compliant, but they have 1 or 2 untested animals, to, at the moment, we have 9 herds with more than 100 untested animals. For several years, the farming industry, through the BVD implementation group, have been asking the department to address these issues through herd level movement restrictions, as similar measures have been very successful in reducing the level of BVD in the Republic of Ireland. The relevant stakeholders, including the farming organisations, have been involved in the development of this legislation and have given their enthusiastic approval in their responses at public consultation earlier this year. The measures being introduced will have no impact at all on most farms, as most farmers are compliant with the testing requirements of the 2016 legislation and take veterinary advice to remove positives and protect their herd from the introduction of new infections. There will inevitably be some cost to a herd which meets the criteria for restriction. However, these are farms that either have 1 or more highly infectious animals and are a major risk to their neighbours and farms they sell to, or they are farms which are significantly non-compliant with the testing requirements of existing legislation. The planned herd restrictions will identify infected animals more quickly and reduce the spread of BVD virus from infected farms, thereby reducing the number of new outbreaks and the overall cost of BVD to the cattle industry. The phased rollout of herd restrictions will ensure all keepers have ample opportunity to avoid being impacted. I'll pass over to Darren now to explain the legislation in more detail.
Okay. Thank you, Mervyn. Thank you, Chair. So, as you know, there are 2 statutory rules proposed. The first one is the BVD Eradication Scheme Amendment Order 2024, and the primary purpose of this order is to amend the existing 2016 BVD order to extend the testing requirements to older animals born before March 2016 without a BVD status. Older female bovines that have calved and their calf already tested negative for BVD will have already been allocated an indirect negative BVD status. There are, however, a small cohort of animals born before March 2016 that have no BVD status at all. So at this stage of the BVD programme, it is important that we have a status for all animals in the national herd. Latest figures are that there's less than 700 animals likely to be affected by this legislation. This number is expected to decrease even further before the legislation comes into force. Costs are likely to be low for farmers to test these additional animals. They could get a blood test taken when their vet's out doing TB testing, or they could use an additional tissue tag to get a sample, and it would be about £5 or less per animal. The second statutory rule is the Bovine Viral Diarrhea Control Order, and this order introduces the necessary herd restriction provisions. There are 3 new types of restrictions that will be introduced basically in a phased manner following the introduction of this legislation. So you'll have your restrictions due to a positive and sometimes inconclusive BVD result. There'll be restrictions due to unknown status animals in the herd, that's animals that haven't been tested for BVD. And there'll be restrictions on breeding age females, what we call Trojan animals. Details on how these and when these will be applied are set out in the written briefing pack provided last week, and I can go into more detail if required. However, it's important to note that the restrictions can be avoided, or if applied, the impact greatly reduced if herd keepers comply with existing legal requirements to ensure all their animals are promptly tested for BVD, And in the event of a BVD positive animal being discovered in their herd, to act quickly to isolate it and then retest or remove the animal from their herd to reduce the risk of spread of BVD to the rest of their herd, while shortening the length of time they'll be restricted. There has been ongoing communications, but since the consultation was carried out in late 2022, Animal Health and Welfare Northern Ireland have been issuing regular communications highlighting that herd restrictions are going to be introduced. This has included targeted communications with herd keepers who are more likely to be affected. That's those with positive, untested or older animals. In 2023, October 2023, the Department also issued a consultation response and way forward document highlighting the plans for BVD. Subject then to securing the necessary approvals of the legislation, the Department, along with Animal Health and Welfare Northern Ireland, will roll out a communications programme to advise herd keepers of the steps that they can take to minimise the impact of the restrictions and help work together towards the eradication of this disease. Given the phased approach to the introduction of herd restrictions over the next 12 to 16 months, this will give farmers ample opportunity to be advised of the plans and to take the necessary steps to avoid being impacted. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions from myself, first of all, if that's okay. I noted in the submission there, it does talk about other jurisdictions, and there are different strategies employed right across the islands. It doesn't necessarily say, from what I've read, that this is proven to be more successful, but I think in Scotland it's mirroring what happens in Scotland. Is that? And would you say that this has quantitatively proven to be a more successful approach?
Well, I'll maybe take that one. I think that this mirrors closely what they have done in the Republic of Ireland, and I would say that DAFN would consider this measure, which I think they introduced in about 2016, quite a number of years ago, has been a very significant step in their programme. Like, I would liken it to a little bit to like trying to control COVID. We're trying to control an infectious disease here. It's critical we stop the introduction of new outbreaks, and movement restriction in this case of animals is critical to that. So I think there's a clear history here of these measures being successful.
There's an interesting one there where there is I thought in restricted herd movements you can have an exemption. One of the exemptions is to allow the breeding bull into a herd. What's the rationale for? What would quantify a reasonable assessment of risk?
I think like that's probably a level. It's a bit like TB restrictions, or even a herd under TB restrictions, and a severe TB breakdown where we stop herds buying in, we will still allow a bull to, because we know that that's critical to the continuity of business of that herd. So I think that would be. I think we would accept that would be the only probably scenario where we would allow an animal to be bought in just to maintain the business going forward.
Can I ask just a bit devil's advocate, because I know obviously I'm new to this role, but in that instance, why would they not just mandate using a straw, for instance, as opposed to artificial insemination as opposed to a bull? So would that not eradicate the risk? Some farms
are more set up for artificial insemination than using the natural mating for various reasons. Just some animals could be outside in the summertime. It's just physically impossible to artificially inseminate them. So in a dairy situation, there's much more use of artificial insemination, whereas in the beef, there'll be much more use of natural service.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna bring in some other members. I might
and sort of just circle back to your first question about the different approaches across Ireland and the different approach, and again in some places in GB. I think it's probably important to say that the Northern Ireland approach has the backing of industry. So regardless of the different approaches that are taking place, say in England or Wales, the thing that we have on our side is that it's actually industry that's been driving this, and there's a significant industry support for this particular approach.
Well, just on that one, if you don't mind, because one of the things that came up in the papers was that one of the biggest challenges is that part of the industry, some farmers are not testing, or how in a herd of maybe around 100, you would say. So in that, are those farmers then restricted in moving animals at the moment, or is this new?
Well, there's there's individual animal level movement restrictions at the moment of the untested animals. So those untested animals, those 16,000 animals, currently have a status on them on iFace computer system which stops their movement through market or to another farm. What we're, the issue I suppose here is, one of the issues here is that we need to expand out that restriction to actually have impact on all movement of animals out of that herd, because if there's an infected herd, you could have animals which themselves have been tested negative, but if they have had contact with an infectious animal, they can be called what's called transiently infected, and they can physically carry that infection. They could be sold through market, go into another farmer, he would just see the animals as having been tested negative as a calf, but it could be carrying virus with it, and that is a key part of what we're trying to cut out here. The other issue around what we describe as Trojan animals is where Trojan animals basically where you have a pregnant female which is either pregnant or could be pregnant, and if that female has been exposed to virus during pregnancy, the calf that it's carrying could be infected with BVD virus, and that will only be discovered several months down the line. Whenever that animal moves into a new herd, it calves, suddenly the calf's tested, and that is part of the reason why BVD, the progress in the BVD scheme has been slower than we would like, and that's part of the reason why it's plateaued in the last couple of years. So those are key points that we're trying to cut out by this legislation.
What does success look like? Can we eradicate it?
Absolutely, we have got the tools. The BVD is a fantastic vet's disease because we've got the tools to eradicate it. We just need people to do the right things promptly. But the end point of this is complete eradication. Like the Republic of Ireland started their compulsory testing 3 years before they started theirs in 2013. They have put significantly more investment into their programme than we have been able to. So they're probably could be 7+ years ahead of us in this. But we're in the same trajectory, and the end goal here is complete eradication of this disease.
Okay, thank you. Declan.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the cost, obviously farmers are under pressure at the minute, and there's every day there's something more piles on them. We note that the big gathering last night and they're over in Westminster today. So there's a lot of pressures in the farming industry. What sort of additional costs are you talking about? There is the briefing paper says it's going to be a cost to farmers. What additional costs might we be talking about here?
In terms of costs, there will be, I suppose, for restricted herds, there'll be extra feed or labour costs with those animals. Like if you have animals that maybe you had intended to send somewhere, so there'll be an additional cost there. But in saying that, by holding the animals, like they're going to be increasing in value at the same time. So in some ways that will overcome a lot of those costs. Anyway, but a lot of this is within the control of the farmer anyway. In terms of untested animals, there's really no excuse to be restricted for having a BVDU in your herd, because at the minute it's a legal requirement to have them all tested. They will be given warnings that they're reaching triggers for those restrictions, so be given 28 days. So they will have time to get them tested before we would even be contemplating applying restrictions. So for those, yes, there should be no costs. For those that have a positive, it's in the farmer's interest to act quickly to have that animal removed from their herd. So it means then it's not going to spread to the rest of the herd or to other herds, and then it means that the restrictions themselves are applying for the minimum period.
Okay. And what is the herd incidence rate in here compared to other regions?
I haven't just the figure.
Just give it in terms of absolute numbers.
Well, I haven't the herd incidence. We can come back to you. We will come back to you and quote those figures. Apologies, I don't have them with me today. The figures I can give you is as of today there's about 70 BVD positives alive as of today that we know of. But that doesn't, and well, in fact, there's 73 alive in 38 herds. And of those, 21 are still in the herds more than 30 days after a positive test result. Now that most of those herds have a single BVD positive. There's actually two herds. There's one herd's got 15 and one herd's got 13. And usually those situations, whenever there's significant numbers of positives, in most of those cases, they have had a positive several months ago and probably been slow to act on it or not taken the best veterinary advice. And this is what happens: is you start, you're not quick enough to deal with whenever you get the first one, and then you have a bigger problem further down the line. Now that doesn't tell the whole story, because obviously there's a continual churn of births and deaths of positives. So in the last 12 months, there's in the order of 1,000 positives have been born in around 470 herds. Now, in 2018, we first put the BVD statuses onto APHIS in 2018, and at that point it was something like 2,800 positives born in the first 12 months. So the figures are going the right direction, but obviously there's a way to go to fully eradicate this disease.
To clarify, Chair, there's quite a lot of statistical data that you're hearing verbatim, so we'll write you with that information in detail so members can see it written down, and it's probably easier to take in that particular form.
Thank you, Declan. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. There will be, I presume, clear criteria as to when a herd will be closed. What you're proposing to do is close the herd completely, I mean, for selling or buying, is that?
They can still sell the direct slaughter, but they can still sell the direct slaughter, but they can't sell on the live market.
Infected animals can't be sold anywhere, sure they can't.
Well, a BVD positive, according to legislation, a BVD positive can technically go to an abattoir. However, a number of years ago, NIMEA, the umbrella organisation for the meat industry, they introduced a voluntary prohibition on receiving BVD positives, because at that point there were lots of farmers who were holding on to their positives in the hope that they would get them fattened. So it's actually not DAERA that's stopping the movement of positives to slaughter. It's actually a voluntary ban by industry.
Being a farmer myself, I have seen these animals. I've had a few positives myself, but they can look very healthy and look that's probably is the problem. Some farmers think there's nothing wrong with that animal, and they don't fully understand the situation.
Yeah. You're quite right in that the textbooks would say a BVD positive is a weakly calf which will die at a young age, but the problem is some of them look absolutely normal, and that is part of the reason why some people find it difficult to be convinced that a positive should be euthanized.
I think it's important to eradicate the disease, and it's important that farmers, that there are rules and that we get there. I think we've been probably too long with getting there, and sometimes farmers can be caught out with the test animal, but the test comes back empty. You see that on a number of occasions, and then maybe carelessly don't retest it immediately because they have to purchase an ad tag to do that. But that happens regularly, I see.
Well, even as I said, that there are over 1,000 herds at the moment that have between 1 and 4 untested animals, and that's likely to be what you're describing. Those are compliant farmers who, and those are the
ones that my view is try and get there, but don't beat the farmer that's trying to.
Yeah, but even when we get to the end point of this legislation with the untested animals, we're not going to be planning to restrict those herds with 1 to 4 BVD untested animals. So there is a tolerance there for that. And while we have that tolerance, we'll continue, we ourselves and Animal Health Welfare Northern Ireland will continue to get that message out there to try and ask people to get those animals brought up.
No, and that's very important too. I think if we're going to get there, everybody needs to play their bit. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, William. There was another question from Anya, but I think I might have to just suspend the meeting because the Minister's making a statement in the chamber, and he's in the chamber at the moment. And I think we would like to be in there for that, if that's okay. It's probably half an hour. Would you be content to hang fire and just finish that out at that stage? Is that okay? So
Membership is over.
yes.
Can I just let you officials know that I'll be in the chair of the assembly
Right, John.
following that,
See
and
that.
therefore won't be able to return.
Thank you, John. Okay, so we're just going to suspend the meeting for the minister's statement, and then we'll reconvene. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
That's okay. Thank you. And, gentlemen, I think you might have an update for us. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Chair. Yeah, I think Declan, you had asked previously about the herd incidence rate, so we've got information on the herd incidence rates for you.
Yeah, well, courtesy of Animal Health and Welfare Northern Ireland, we can inform you that the latest animal instance figure here is 0.198%. And you asked for a comparison with other jurisdictions. Really, the only other comparison we can fairly make would be with the south. The latest figure we have from the south, an equivalent figure, they would be down at 0.005%. So well lower than we are. That would be like our figure was in the order of 40 times what their figure is. So that reflects the fact that they started commercial testing before us, and they've put more investment into their programme. At a herd level, our latest figure is 2.44%. We compare that with the south is 0.16%. So at a herd level, we're something in the order of 15 times higher than where they're at.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That was very useful. And Anya?
Thank you, Chair. And just a quick one from a farmer's point of view, what are the department doing or putting in place to ensure that farmers are kept fully informed throughout this process? Obviously, given, I'm assuming, some of the complications that may crop up with NIFAS.
Well, there is a full communications.
Yes, I'll start off. Well, I suppose once we get the approvals for the legislation, subject to the approvals being obtained, ourselves, along with Animal Health and Welfare, will roll out a full communications programme, and that will basically to advise herd keepers how they can minimise the impact of restrictions and what steps they should be taking now. With the restrictions coming in a phased manner, so basically for the first 3 months, there's a grace period of 28 days for any positives. So the department will be contacting any herd keepers that have a positive result at that stage, so they'll know well in advance that they have to remove the animal within the 28 days to avoid restrictions. So as the different stages go through, like over the next 12 to 16 months, there'll be ongoing communications just to keep herd keepers up to date on what's happening over the different stages and what action they need to be taken. So it's going to be a rolling programme.
Just to add to that, I suppose I would say that there'll be widespread generic communications in the press, and I want to, and ourselves will put out Twitter messages and use social media where we can. I want to have facility to put out targeted text messages to certain people who, are at risk of becoming, impacted by this. And certainly we will be putting out, we will be making phone calls, and we will be sending out targeted letters. So certainly in the first 12 months, there's no excuse for anybody to be caught in the hop here. People will be warned before anybody will be restricted.
Thank you, and Michelle?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to talk about enforcement, and obviously the penalty is around restriction. But I suppose there will be those who are persistent offenders. So I really just wanted you to talk to me through about the penalties associated with that, and also the absence of powers of investigation.
Well, with regard to enforcement, it's herd restrictions. Farmers don't like herd restrictions because they impact on businesses. So we know from TB, the experience there, and obviously the experience in the south as well, that farmers will act when they know restrictions are coming. They will to avoid those restrictions. So it's much more effective than threatening prosecution. We've taken a couple of cases on prosecution cases for, or we're certainly aware of one for having BVD on tested animals that's been successful, but that doesn't impact on the wider industry. This will have that broad impact on industry that we need to drive down this disease.
Just to add to that, in terms of offences and penalties, it's the existing offences and penalties under the Disease of Animals Order, so that they will apply to this legislation. So I think on conviction, summary conviction, you could be liable to a fine up to £5,000 if something is taken through under that.
Okay, and associated with that then is there power of investigation then? So if you become aware that there are incidents on farms or that there isn't compliance, to be able to go onto the farm to be able to investigate, is that all part of that existing legislation?
I'd be under, yes, the Disease of Animals, there'll be powers under that anyway.
Okay, so you don't need to replicate that?
No.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Michelle, members, any other questions on this regard? No? Okay, thank you so much for that, guys. Are you agreed then, members, that the department proceeds to make the SR and we will then consider it and the SR report formally in due course?
Yep.
Does that apply to both SRs? Is that both SRs you're agreeing to?
Yes. Yeah, is that the both SRs then we're agreeing to in that concept? Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, agenda item 7 then is SL1, the bovine viral diarrhea eradication scheme. Sounds a wee bit like the last. That's both. Sorry,
We've done both, yes.
Right, oh, sorry, I had one query on that then, if you don't mind. Sorry. Sure. One query. So obviously one of the changes is to pre-2016. So how many animals actually would that? I know there says here 700 infected. Is that correct?
No, that's 700
total
untested. So this is pre-March 2016 born animals. There's about currently there's 600 and something of those untested, so they've no BVD status. So currently those animals can move farm to farm, but those animals have not been BVD tested. We need to bring those into the compulsory testing of the scheme. So that's what we propose to do. We're planning to give. We will be communicating directly with those impacted. Most of those people have actually probably one or two. It would be the typical scenario. There will be direct communications going to anybody impacted, and we're not planning to actually impose that restriction probably until, I think it's the 1st of March we're proposing. There'll probably be a lead-in time of a couple of months where people will be communicated with and they'll have opportunity to get those tested before they're restricted.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today. Members, I'm going to move swiftly on to agenda item 8, if that's okay. That is the SL1, the environmental protection wet wipes containing plastics, and that is the regulations for Northern 2025. Refer you to papers in the packet, pages 61 to 68, regarding the SL1, the environmental protections wet wipe containing plastic regulations. This SR will be made in alignment with the other UK nations and will restrict the use of wet wipes containing plastic throughout the UK. Each UK nation will make their own domestic regulations. The environmental protection wet wipe containing plastic England Regulations 25, the Environmental Protection Wet Wipe Scotland Regulations 25, the Environmental Protection Single-Use Plastic Wales Act 2023, and Wales are amending their existing Single-Use Plastic Act to include wet wipes containing plastic. The background to this is that DAERA proposed to make the SR under powers of the Waste and Contaminated Land Northern Ireland Order 1997. Subject to executive approval and progress in other UK nations, the SR is intended to be led before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure in early 2025. It's anticipated that will come into operation in mid-26 to allow industry and retailers time to adapt to the change. Purpose of the legislation. The purpose is to restrict the supply and sale of wet wipes containing plastic in Northern Ireland and their use in domestic settings. Wet wipes containing plastic are an unnecessary source of plastic and microplastic pollution, being commonly found in beach litter surveys and indeed in waterways. Members, this proposal assists in meeting a commitment within the EIP to reduce plastic pollution. So I'm going to welcome the following officials to the meeting. That is Colin Breen, who is the Assistant Director of Environmental Policy Research, and Janet Sheridan, Head of Single-Use Plastic Branches. I'm going to ask you to now present to the committee, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I'm just going to give an introduction. I might cover some of the things you've already said. So in the UK, an astonishing 11 billion wet wipes are used every year. So that's 163 wet wipes for every one in the UK every year. And an estimated half of these wet wipes contain plastic. DAERA policy officials have been working alongside officials from DEFRA and the Scottish and Welsh governments on the development of a ban on the supply and sale of wet wipes containing plastic. This policy proposal has been around for some time, with the UK government including a commitment to implement the ban in their 25-year improvement plan published in January 2018, and as part of a series of steps to eliminate avoidable plastic waste. Wet wipes frequently escape waste management systems and enter the terrestrial and marine environment. Research from Water UK shows that 22% of people admit to flushing wet wipes down the toilet, and a Welsh study also found that wet wipes account for 2.5% of litter by item count. Plastic in wet wipes breaks down into microplastics, which can be ingested by marine and other aquatic animals, including zooplankton, and can enter our food chain and water supply. Wet wipes containing plastic are an avoidable source of plastic and microplastic pollution. Whilst it is acknowledged that there has been a concerted voluntary reduction in the manufacture and supply and sale of wet wipes containing plastic amongst some producers and retailers, there is no guarantee this effort will be sustained if regulatory action is not taken. A UK-wide consultation on the proposed ban of the manufacture, sale and supply of wet wipes was published on the 14th of October 2023 and ran for 6 weeks. And a joint UK government response to the consultation was published in April of this year. Consultation responses and stakeholder engagement then identified the need for some exemptions to be incorporated for medical and industrial purposes. After assessing the consultation responses, manufacture is not proposed to be in scope of the ban. Some manufacturers stated they would need 2 to 3 years to transition to plastic-free production. Manufacturers are being encouraged to transition to plastic-free wipes. Some of them have already done so, but they may continue to manufacture for exempted uses or for export. Each administration will now introduce regulations separately via their respective legislative mechanisms. So the main aim of the regulations is to restrict the use of wet wipes containing plastic in a domestic setting where suitable alternatives exist, as these are more likely to be incorrectly disposed of and find their way into the natural and marine environment. All UK nations are aiming to lay regulations in early 2025, with an 18-month transition period coming into operation mid-2026. The Department is satisfied that the introduction of this statutory rule will not have a significant impact on NI businesses. DAERA is aware of 2 manufacturers of wet wipes based in Northern Ireland, one of which specialises in producing wet wipes for medical, pharmaceutical and industrial purposes, which would be exempt under this ban, and another which produces plastic-free wet wipes at a site in GB. But a regulatory impact assessment will be completed and published alongside the regulations. It is expected to be high compliance amongst retailers, as the ban will be UK-wide, and an 18 months transition before coming into force will allow industry and retailers time to use existing stock. Once plastic is mismanaged and enters the environment, there is very little we can do to extract it. These regulations aim to remove one contributor to plastic and microplastic pollution from circulation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. So the exemptions will only apply to manufacture for export. Is that correct? And
Or the exempted purposes.
Yeah.
So it came out during the consultation responses. So in medical settings, business to business. So for like industrial purposes, it was like automotive industries where they're removing a lot of grease, catering industries where they maybe use more disinfectants. The cost to have the plastic free with the same strength at this time was just felt to be too much. So they can still manufacture. I think it's about 20% of UK manufacturing would be for exempted purposes.
are consumers aware at the moment of, because I certainly wasn't, of the existence of plastics in wet wipes, and is there any effort to educate?
I think some consumers are, because this proposal has been around for some time, and probably a lot of it came from consumer demand. Some of it's obviously come from the problems when they get into sewers and waterways. But I think some consumers are. The EU regulation has got a plastic and product logo, and so it will apply to wet wipes. So even in the GB market, you will see the plastic and product logo, and that's kind of had a negative impact because it's making people aware. And then some of the supermarket owned brands have already moved. Tesco, Boots are already gone plastic free.
You've stolen my thunder from my last question, which was, is it clearly labelled? So it is labelled on the shelves?
Those that are complying.
Yeah. Yes, it's not mandatory, but those that are complying, it's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a good selling point for an awful lot of people, for a lot of retailers to say that their wipes are plastic free, because more people are demanding, more sustainable alternatives.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good move. I've seen places littered with them and different things. So I'm going to bring in the Deputy Chair, Declan.
Thank you. On the notice says that the manufacturers are encouraged to move to plastic-free production. What incentives or how can you achieve this?
Well, I suppose if sort of 60-80% of their business is now going to have to be plastic-free, I don't think it was they were opposed to being plastic free. I think they just said they needed the time to go plastic free. So with the 18 months, you know, because this has been, well, the joint response was out in April. By the time we bring the regulations in the 18 months, you're into nearly 2 years there of time. They have to try and transition over.
And I think as well, you know, we're sending out a strong signal against, you know, plastic containing wet wipes, you know, by being one of the first countries to do it, and that'll, you know, other countries will follow suit. The problems with plastic containing wet wipes are universal across the world. So, you know, as people move towards it, that naturally it restricts the market of people buying plastic containing wet wipes, and naturally makes manufacturers move to plastic free wet wipes. And as they get better as well, there's no reason to put plastic in them.
Thank you, Doug. And just let you know, there's a motion shortly that we'll probably most of us need to attend to, and certainly the Deputy Chair will. So, Patsy, you're next.
Thanks very much, Chair. It was on that point just. I see the exemptions there, and I can understand the rationale for that. How do you enforce this?
Well, it's intended the department can authorise local councils, but we do intend to have more of a communication campaign ahead of the ban actually coming into force. And as I said, some supermarkets and that are largely voluntarily transitioning over.
That's not my point. My point is, comms is all right. That's going to inform people, you hope. It's how do you enforce it where people are saying, oh, well, sure, we get these cheaper or whatever it is, and they're still for sale in the shops and all that sort of thing. How do you actually enforce that?
Well, there will be enforcement provisions, and the SR will be able to. It will be designated authorised persons to enforce, and then I think the intention is to have a fine of up to £5,000.
And that leads me on to my next question: Who are the range of authorised persons?
I think the intention at this stage is to kind of go on a reactive basis. So we do intend to do quite a communication plan. There's retailer awareness webinar planned as well ahead of laying the regulations to let retailers know of their responsibilities that they're not to be.
Sorry, I get that, but who are likely to be the authorised persons?
It's likely to be local councils.
And that brings me on to the next question. Have you consulted with local councils about this yet?
We're having early engagement. I suppose we need to fine tune the enforcement and the regulations, and then we'll have discussions with the councils. But the cost of enforcement and a reactive approach is currently it's estimated less than £6,000 per year for 3 years, I suppose, until it kind of beds in.
£6,000 per year for the whole region?
For Northern Ireland, yes. That's based on the hourly rate of a enforcement officer.
All right. There's a lot of premises, you know, to check.
Well, we hope the larger retailers will say are voluntary compliance, so then it leaves you just.
Okay. Right. All right. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Patsy, Anya? You okay?
No.
Oh. You're right. Okay. Are there any other questions from members now?
Okay,
William?
Okay.
You content? You get enough light today. But then you did bring us a bit of a good news story, to be fair.
Absolutely.
So, well, more of that, please. Thank you very much for your presentation. And members, are you content that the department proceeds to make the SR, and then we will consider it and the SR report formally in due course? Content? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Agenda item 9 is correspondence, and with your forbearance, I'm going to read through this very quickly. So if you spot something, please indicate. So 9.1, I refer you to correspondence dated 13th of November, page 74 to 79 of the pack from the Department regarding the UK Employment Rights Bill, the abolition of the Gang Master and Labour Abuse Authority. Members, this is in respect to the potential extension to Northern Ireland of provisions in the UK Employment Rights Bill, which would abolish the Gang Master and Labour Abuse Authority, GLAA, and move its enforcement powers under the Secretary of State for Business and Trade. While this remains under review, at this stage the Minister is minded to agree to the extension of these powers to Northern Ireland, which will require a legislative consent motion to be brought to the Assembly. The Department officials will update the Committee in due course on these developments and bringing forward the LCM. Any comments? Are you content to note? Okay. Yep. 9.2, members, I refer you to correspondence page 80 and 90 of the pack regarding the NI Youth Assembly and its consultation response to the draft programme for government. Are you content to note? Thank you, members. 9.3, refer you to correspondence at page 91 of the pack from William Taylor, Farmers for Action, regarding the Chancellor's budget and requesting an urgent formal meeting with the committee due to the now elevated level of importance for the Northern Ireland Farmers Welfare Bill to go forward. That's their words. Members, the previous Chair, Lord Elliott, and Deputy Chair Declan McAleer met informally with the FFA on the 30th of April regarding the proposed Farm Welfare Bill, and last week we had the Minister's definitive response on that bill. We have asked DEFRA to respond on the plans of the new UK Government in fairness in the food supply chain from Farmgate onwards. This item remains on our agenda until we have completed the due diligence that we had agreed a number of weeks ago. The letter to DEFRA was sent later than the letter to the Minister, as we are waiting for confirmation from FFA that we had the most recent version of the proposed bill to forward at that time, so we need to give DEFRA further time to respond. We also asked for sight of the FFA legal advice and are waiting for it to be forwarded to us. I propose we wait until we receive a response from DEFRA before we agree to this request to meet FFA. Thank you. 9.4, members are referred to correspondence from the Business Office dated the 14th of November at pages 91 to 155 of the pack regarding the 20th annual report on the drinking water quality in Northern Ireland for 2023. There's a link to the full report in the correspondence. In Northern Ireland, over 99% of the population received their drinking water from the Northern Ireland Water Limited. Overall, public drinking water quality for 2023 remained high, with 99.92 compliance, a slight increase from 2022, which was 99.91. In the forward of the report, the Chief Inspector of Drinking Water addressed blue-green algae in sources, stating controls are in place to manage this risk and ensure the safety of drinking water. However, a serious event occurred in September 23 regarding the acceptability to consumers of the water supplied from Myola Water Treatment Works, which abstracts from Lough Neagh. Enforcement action is taken where necessary, and in 2023 there were 4 notices in place requiring improvements at 3 water treatment works. The report notes that challenges continue as we strive to tackle the impacts of environmental factors on the quality of our drinking water. Members, have you any comments? But certainly it's something we need to be absolutely alive to. Patsy?
Sure. There's an unusual bit in the report. You referred specifically to Myola Water Treatment Works there, and the investigation's ongoing there. It appears that from the report, our investigation is still ongoing. Now, that seems to be after a very protracted period of time.
It's 23.
And that's 2023, and since then we've had the incidents, tasted the water myself and smelt the water myself, of public uproar about it. So I can't understand why the investigation after all this time is still ongoing. So would it be possible, and it's referred twice in the report, would it be possible that we could find out from them why the investigation is still ongoing? Are there any major issues or alerts or whatever we
certainly get
aware
a
of?
confirmation that it is ongoing, because the report reflects 2023 and obviously the fact. So we need to. So I think maybe if we direct the clerk to compose something which asks for a definitive response in regards to that specific investigation. Has it been brought to a conclusion? And then if it hasn't, then there's obviously a subsequent set of questions.
Because the date of the communication is the 14th of November. So if there is anything that needs to be rectified by way of the actual factual detail in the report, that would be important. But it's also important, if there still is ongoing investigation, that would really concern me.
The fact that you're getting the report a year late, well, obviously they take time to compile and so on, but we would need to understand why that is the case. I would agree. We content, clerk? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Chair.
No, thank you, and good spot, Patsy. 10.5, members are referred to correspondence from Daniel McCann dated the 14th of November, pages 156 to 192 of the pack. He works for Malloy Grassland Services and French company SOBAC as an external consultant and advisory in relation to algae solution. A presentation is included, presentation of SOBAC's concept, the products proposed to reduce leaching in water table, more mineral remainders in the soil and more stable humus. Are you content to forward the correspondence and presentation to the department members? Yep. Thank you. Agenda item 10, the forward work plan, refer you to the forward work draft programme up to the 9th of January 25 in the packet page 7073. Members, we will be meeting in Loughry College on Thursday, 21st of November at 10 a.m. Directions have been forwarded to you, and please go to reception at Loughry College to register on arrival. You will also note that at next week's meeting, the 20th of November, we will have a briefing from the Minister regarding the CVO review on bovine tuberculosis. Members, are there any other matters of business? Bring my attention. No? Okay. Agenda item 12, date and time. Next meeting. Our next meeting is Loughry College, Cafe Cookstown, 10 a.m. 21st November. Please go to reception as instructed, and I'll see you there. And thank you. Now, meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Well done, guys.
Good job.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Fortunately, this is the approach that we have to take, but I think the organisations that the member is referring to will understand and in fact recognise the need for this to be done on a universal nature, because there simply was no alternative. But I do send a message to those who find themselves in the position